Millionaire saw his maid sleeping inside of his garage with a Ferrari. What he did next shocked everyone. The cold concrete pressed against her back as she shifted under the thin blanket, the hum of the mansion long gone silent above her. The garage smelled of oil and wax, the polished surfaces of the cars gleaming faintly in the moonlight filtering through narrow windows. It was not a bed, but she had made it into one. A folded sheet on top of cardboard, a blanket tucked close, and her body curled small between the Ferrari and the wall. She listened for footsteps, for any sign that someone might discover her secret. Nothing came. Only the ticking of the cars cooling after the engines had been shut off earlier in the day. Her eyes roamed across the rows of gleaming vehicles, each one worth more than she could ever imagine saving in her lifetime. They seemed to mock her, their sleek bodies reflecting wealth that was never hers. She thought about her small rented room in the city, shared with 2 other women, noisy and crowded. Coming here to the garage had been a desperate choice after one too many late nights when her body simply couldn't make the journey home. At first it felt dangerous, risky, but the quiet of the garage offered something she craved: peace. The maid had learned to time it carefully. She waited until the staff upstairs were asleep, until the millionaire had retreated to his suite, until the house stilled to nothing but creaks and sighs. Only then would she steal away, tiptoeing past the kitchen and slipping through the side door into the garage. There she would lower herself carefully onto the floor, pulling her blanket tight, whispering a prayer that morning would come before anyone noticed. Tonight, the exhaustion hit harder than usual. Her shifts had stretched longer, her tasks more demanding. Every corner of the mansion sparkled because of her hands, yet no one said thank you. She carried trays heavier than her frame should allow, polished marble until her wrists burned, scrubbed silver until her nails cracked. Each day took more out of her, and still, she kept moving. The garage had become the only place she could stop. Her eyelids fluttered, heavy with fatigue, but her mind did not rest. Memories crept in, of her family far away, of the sacrifices she made to send them money. She thought of her little brother's school fees, her mother's medicine, the rent that swallowed most of her wages. The thought of failing them haunted her, and so she endured. Even if it meant sleeping on a cold floor beside cars she would never touch, she endured. A draft slipped under the garage door, raising goosebumps on her arms. She tucked the blanket closer, shivering slightly, then let her head fall against the wall. Her breathing slowed, the day's fatigue winning the battle. As her eyes closed, she whispered to herself that no one would ever know. To the world, she was invisible, a shadow in the background. But in this quiet, hidden corner, she allowed herself to be human, if only for a few hours. The Ferrari's hood caught the moonlight, a gleam stretching across its perfect surface. She did not notice. Sleep claimed her before she could see how close her fate and the millionaire's pride were about to collide. The faint clink of metal startled her as she shifted her blanket on the cold garage floor. For a moment, she thought it was just a wrench rolling from the workbench, but when she leaned closer, her breath caught. A glimmer shone faintly under the Ferrari, a flash of silver in the dust. She crawled forward, heart quickening, and her fingers closed around a key ring heavy and unmistakable. When she pulled it into the light, her stomach tightened. The prancing horse emblem gleamed back at her. The millionaire's Ferrari keys. She froze, sitting back on her heels, the cold concrete biting through the fabric of her uniform. Her eyes darted toward the garage door, toward the still mansion beyond it, half expecting footsteps to come storming down. But the silence held, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator in the corner and the soft ticking of the cars cooling in the dark. She turned the keys in her hand, the polished metal catching the faint moonlight. They looked out of place here, dropped into the dust of the garage floor like something discarded, forgotten. Her mind swirled with questions. Had he been here earlier that day, admiring the car, showing it off to some guest? The millionaire was obsessed with these machines, his pride wrapped up in their shine. And yet he had been careless. Careless enough to drop the very keys he guarded so jealously. Now they were in her hands, resting against the same palms that scrubbed his marble floors and carried his silver trays. She could return them immediately. March upstairs, knock on his door, explain what she had found. But the thought made her chest tighten. What if he asked why she had been in the garage so late at night? What if he demanded answers she could not give? The risk of discovery felt sharper than ever. A single question could unravel her secret, the fragile routine that allowed her to survive. She clenched the keys tightly, the cold edges digging into her skin. If she kept them until morning, perhaps she could slip them back onto the counter where he often left them, pretend nothing had happened. But what if he noticed before then? What if he came searching in the middle of the night, raging, and found her here with his prized possession clutched in her hand? The image sent a shiver down her spine. She set the keys gently on the blanket beside her and pulled her knees close, resting her chin against them. The decision loomed larger than she expected. They were only keys, and yet they carried the weight of everything that divided their worlds. For him, they symbolized power and freedom, the ability to drive wherever he pleased, to flaunt wealth without a thought. For her, they were a reminder of confinement, of invisible lines she was never meant to cross. Her eyes flicked back to the Ferrari, its smooth red surface glinting even in the dim light. She imagined for a moment sliding into the leather seat, turning the ignition, feeling the roar beneath her. The thought was wild, dangerous, and fleeting. She pushed it aside, whispering a silent prayer that morning would come quickly and with it a chance to make this right. But still, the keys remained beside her, heavy and bright in the shadows, a secret waiting to tip the balance of everything she thought she knew. The door slammed against the wall, the sound ricocheting through the cavernous garage like a gunshot. She startled awake, blanket half slipping from her shoulders, blinking against the sudden blaze of light. The millionaire's footsteps echoed, sharp and furious, his tailored shoes striking the concrete floor with intent. He moved fast, not with confusion, but with certainty, as if he had known exactly where to look. She rose slowly, clutching the blanket, her heart pounding as his eyes locked on her. In her hand, still curled from the night before, gleamed the Ferrari keys. For a second, she thought of dropping them, letting them clatter to the ground so she could insist it was a mistake, but it was too late. His gaze had already fastened on the sight, his face twisting with something harsher than anger, suspicion sharpened into accusation. "In my world," he hissed, voice reverberating off the polished cars, "a maid with keys in her hand means one thing." She wanted to speak, to explain how she found them beneath the car, how she had meant to return them, but the words tangled in her throat. The weight of his stare pressed down, making the garage feel smaller, colder. He advanced a step, his presence towering, the smell of his cologne cutting through the oil and dust. She could feel the judgment radiating from him, a verdict already written before she even opened her mouth. Her mind raced. She pictured the staff whispering, the accusation spreading through the mansion like wildfire. Theft, betrayal, disloyalty. No one would believe she only slept here for peace, that the garage had been her refuge when the walls of the servants' quarters closed in. No one would believe she had held those keys all night like a burden she wanted to shed, not a prize she wanted to steal. The silence stretched taut, broken only by the faint ticking of the Ferrari cooling behind her. She steadied herself. Lifting her chin, though, her hands trembled. "I didn't take them," she said, her voice soft but unyielding. "They were already here. I only picked them up." He laughed once, sharp and humorless, the sound cutting through her words. To him, it was absurd, the idea that his prized keys had simply fallen, that they had ended up in her hands by chance. The idea that she, who polished the silver and swept the floors, would stumble upon them innocently. His world was not built on coincidence. His world was built on ownership, and to see her with what was his felt like trespass. Still, her eyes did not drop. She held his gaze even as fear knotted her chest, even as her pulse thudded loud enough to drown out thought. The weight of the keys in her palm grew unbearable, heavy not with metal but with what they meant, symbols of power, of mistrust, of the fine line she walked every day in this house. The moment stood like a trial, the cars around them silent witnesses, and though she could feel the scales tipping against her, she gripped the keys tighter, her silence carrying a kind of defiance. If he saw only betrayal, so be it. She would not beg. She would not fall to her knees to convince him of her innocence. She had lived too long in the shadows of other people's suspicion to give him the satisfaction of breaking her now. The garage hummed with tension, the future narrowing to what he would do next, and as he loomed over her, his anger burning hot, she knew one thing with chilling clarity: this was not about keys or cars. This was about power, and the dangerous truth that in that moment, she held a piece of his in her hand. His voice ricocheted against the steel beams and polished hoods, each word like a hammer striking metal. He accused her openly. No hesitation, no pause for her side of the story. His tone filled the garage, echoing through the open door and drawing others toward the sound. Soon, shadows gathered at the threshold, cooks still in aprons, a butler stiff in his uniform, maids with dust still on their sleeves. Whispers stirred like a current, feeding the tension. The black maid stood in the corner, blanket fallen around her ankles, the Ferrari keys heavy in her palm. She did not flinch at his words. She had learned long ago that raising her voice against power only fueled it. Calm, steady, she explained how she had found the keys beneath the car, how she had been resting in the garage after yet another 14-hour day because there was nowhere else to escape. Her words carried no apology, only quiet truth. But truth was fragile in this house. The millionaire's fury drowned her explanation. He paced, gesturing toward the gleaming Ferrari as though its existence alone proved her guilt. He painted pictures with his accusations, her hands on the wheel, the car disappearing into the night, his reputation mocked by the tabloids. Each word layered suspicion onto her shoulders, while the staff at the door watched with wide eyes, torn between belief and doubt. Still, she held her ground. Her voice remained calm, steady, even as his rose higher. She reminded him of the years she had worked without complaint, the nights she had stayed late to ensure the house was perfect, the mornings she rose before dawn to keep it running. She did not ask for his trust, only laid the facts bare. The keys had been dropped, she had found them, and she had not moved a step toward betrayal. For a moment, silence pressed down. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to pause. The staff exchanged glances, whispers rising again like smoke. Some looked at her with pity, others with suspicion, but just a few with something that looked like belief. The scene balanced precariously. Scandal and ruin loomed in one direction, truth and dignity in another. All it would take was a single word from him to decide which way the weight would fall. She tightened her grip on the keys, not as a thief clutching treasure, but as a woman bracing against judgment. Her posture, straight and unyielding, spoke louder than her words. The millionaire's chest rose and fell with fury, his pride burning hotter than the logic in her defense. Yet something in her composure unsettled him. He had expected begging, tears, collapse. Instead, he found her steady, her voice unwavering, her truth unmoved by his storm. The whispers swelled again at the door, louder this time, no longer just gossip, but questions unspoken. And in that heavy, breathless space, the garage felt like a courtroom, each polished hood and silent witness reflecting back not just her defiance, but his arrogance. The keys still sat in her hand, but the fury in the millionaire's face began to soften, not with forgiveness, but with something heavier. Shame slid into his voice as he demanded to know why she was in the garage at all, why she had made a bed beside the cold floor when an entire mansion stood just a few steps away. Her answer was not dressed in excuses or pleas. She spoke plainly, her voice quiet but firm, explaining that her shifts had stretched so long and her energy so thin that there were nights she could not make the walk home. Her room in the service wing had been taken by new hires, and no one had cared enough to notice. The garage had become her only refuge. Her words cut deeper than he expected. He glanced around at the gleaming Ferrari under the fluorescent lights, at the polished chrome and pristine leather, and the realization struck him like a blow. Here he was, a man whose wealth could fill garages with symbols of power, yet under the same roof a woman who served him daily had been forced to sleep in the shadows beside those machines. The Ferrari, his prized possession, no longer looked like triumph. It looked like distance, a wall between two worlds that shared a roof, but not a life. The staff still lingered at the door, whispering, eyes darting between them. The maid stood steady, no longer defending herself, but simply existing in her truth. She had no reason to lie. Her exhaustion was written in her posture, her sacrifice evident in the fact that she had chosen a cold floor rather than risk being late for work. He realized then that his accusations had not just been cruel, but absurd. She had not reached for his keys out of greed, but because they had landed in her path, forgotten by a man too distracted by his own status to notice what he dropped. The silence in the garage thickened as the weight of this truth settled over him. For the first time, his voice wavered. His pride fought to hold on to anger, but it was slipping, undone by the clarity in front of him. He muttered something about her honesty, his tone awkward, unfamiliar with gratitude. The arrogance that had fueled his accusations cracked, replaced by a dawning awareness of how blind he had been. To the others, it looked like a scandal diffused. But for him, it was something far deeper. He could no longer see her as invisible, another shadow moving through his house. She had been surviving under his nose, making choices not from deceit but necessity. And for her, there was no victory in this moment, only quiet dignity. The Ferrari behind him gleamed brighter than ever, but to him it had become a mirror not of wealth, but of failure. What she had shown him, without meaning to, was that character could not be bought, and that sacrifice left a mark far stronger than luxury ever could. The garage was no longer just the place where he kept his car. It was the place where his perspective cracked open.